fundamental and logical thing to look at this more closely and invite in an expert with a particular emphasis on personal relationships and your personal impact. When I first met our speaker, the first thing she said to me was, it was all about how you dress. And I feel a little bit embarrassed, like thinking, have I dressed appropriately? I don't know, I'm probably going to find out. Something for you all to think about, and I'd like to welcome our speaker, Joanna Gaudoin, who's going to talk about networking and personal impact.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Do feel free to come forward a little bit more. I don't bite, I promise. But I am going to start with a question. So how many of you today, just a show of hands, immediately saw someone you knew when you came in the room and started talking to them? Okay, so probably about 40–50%. So that means a reasonable number of you had to find somebody new to talk to. Now, I bet you went through some criteria in your head, even if you didn't realise it, when you were thinking about who to talk to. Just think about that for a moment. What might you have thought about? Well, really, this is where personal impact really, really matters, because actually, when we come to an event like this, we are assessing whether or not we're going to get to know someone to start with and find out about their great knowledge and expertise. And that is fundamental from what we see in their personal impact. So David mentioned appearance, yes, that's important, but also body language. What can we see from afar? Does someone look friendly? Do they look welcoming? So whilst technical knowledge is always going to be important, I never deny that's important to any of my clients, often who you are as a person and how you're communicating yourself through your three tools of appearance, body language and voice is really fundamental to actually sometimes whether people engage with you at all. And people massively underestimate that. So there is a really hard reality to what you might term soft skills. So networking, that is one of my specialist areas, and I know I'm preaching to the converted because you're all stood here, so you all clearly see that it's valuable or at least something that needs to be in your diary. But my question to you is, how much thought do you give it when you come? Do you plan in advance? Do you think about who you want to meet? So I want to try and talk you just through the stages of networking, really, to get you to think about what more you could be doing to get more out of these events than just a nice pile of beautiful business cards. We've all got them sat at home, haven't we? But fundamentally, if that's all we end up with, we might as well have stayed in the office, or if it's an evening event, gone home and watched EastEnders. Because it's a waste of time if nothing happens as a result. So I want to start off by talking about planning. So just a few key tips really and things to think about. So it is important to think about what you're going to wear actually. It sounds superficial, but thinking about what's appropriate for the event I'm going to. Because these days there's a lot of judgment involved. It's not like 30–40 years ago where the obvious thing was, oh, it's work, I'm in a suit. Okay, so it's thinking about what's going to be appropriate for me, who I am, what is my business, and also who's wearing what at the event. What sort of event is it? So that's really important to think about. Secondly, how am I going to introduce what I do? If we are going to an event that's all people from our industry, now that's different because everyone's going to instantly recognise what we do. And likewise, if I say I'm a lawyer, people will have a vague idea what that means. But you might want to think about how you explain things that people are actually interested. You know, that they actually want to ask you some questions and they don't just feel intimidated. So thinking about how you talk about what you do, how do you actually help people, what are the benefits that you bring? And then thirdly, when you're planning, thinking about some goals. Now we'd all love to come here, wouldn't we, and walk out with 5 new clients. Is that likely to happen? No, not really. The odd time I've gone to an event for the first time and got a new client, but it is a long game and it's a numbers game. So the focus should be on how can I help the people there and how can I start to build some great relationships rather than what can I sell. You know, we've all had the person that's come up to us and done the business card stab, haven't we? And before we've even said anything to them. So thinking about what are my goals, and if you make some goals, even if they're as small as to meet up with a couple of people for coffee afterwards, you're more likely to achieve something than nothing. So that's the planning. When we come on to attending, so really, really key. Have you ever walked up to a group and then thought, oh dear, I've interrupted here. I feel really out of place. I feel like a gooseberry. And that's probably because you've not read the body language right. If you read it well, you will fit seamlessly into a group. So really important to think about who you're joining when you go to an event. So looking for open groups, looking for where, in my case, there's a Joanna-sized gap, and I'm not trying to shove myself between two people who are then effectively looking like they're watching tennis. You know, to look at me, it's very difficult. Okay, so really thinking about who you're joining. The second one, which we see all the time, the person that comes up to you and the first thing they say is, so what do you do? Whoa, it's a bit aggressive, isn't it? And it's actually not very human. It's very hard to go back to talking about the weather when you've already talked about what you do. So to always encourage you to start conversations with human stuff. And when I talk to corporate people and people say, well, how do I start talking to a senior person? Well, they are human too. They've had a journey. They've had to get here. There's weather outside for them too. If it's Monday, like it is today, they've had a weekend. So always trying to think about engaging with people on a human level. It will then help your conversation once you get talking about work. And my third point about attending is be very careful what you promise. Which is going to link to my other point about following up in a minute. But it's very easy in the heat of the moment, especially if we've met somebody that could be very influential for us, to think about promising the world, oh, I can connect you to this great person, I can do this. And then actually the next day you think better of it, because actually you don't know that new person well, and are you going to connect them to your key client? So really, really think about helping people, but making sure it's something you're actually willing to do. So the third area is afterwards, and this relates to what I was saying earlier about following up. If we do nothing, it's been a complete waste of time. So really think about what did you promise and make sure you do that as soon as possible, really, the next day. Really important to follow through on what we say. I meet lots of people at groups that promise stuff and they do absolutely nothing. And that just gives them a negative view in my mind. I think, well, I'd never refer a client to you, because actually how do I know you bother about that? So make sure you're following up, and make sure you're strategic about things as well. So if there's someone you met that, yeah, they're not going to be a client next week, but who knows, in 2 years' time, and believe you me, I get a lot of business that way, 2 years' time someone comes back to me, you know, you remember them and you write something about them in your diary, you follow up with them, maybe every 3 months, 6 months. So really think about that. It's about the medium to longer term, not just the right now. So a few tips on networking. Also, think about where else you have touch points with your potential clients, your clients, and other business contacts. People might meet you here first, then they might go and check you out on LinkedIn or your company website. Does all of that align with the person they met here? Because if it doesn't, people get a bit confused and think, oh well, maybe they're not quite who I thought they were, I won't contact them again. So I work with people a lot on all the different touch points that they have with clients and prospects and other business contacts. So think about what is out there about you. How do you interact with people in meetings, so face to face, but also on the phone? What are they seeing online? So it's important there's a consistent personal image that's being communicated about you. Now I work with my clients on all these areas, and those areas of appearance, body language and voice, and I always try and raise their self-awareness, so get them to think about what they're communicating and what others are seeing of them. Educating them on how we can optimise that for them, to help them be the best they can be. And then we move on to practice that. So working with clients one-to-one, so that might be on presentation skills with senior execs. So a guy from Mazars last year who wanted to be a partner, to go from director. We worked in depth on that. Networking skills, so that might be workshops with big corporates, but equally I work with individuals that perhaps run their own business, or smaller SMEs that want their team to get more out of networking. So all the work I do is very focused on people in teams, individuals, and then I also speak at conferences and events too. So if you've got any questions at all, please do come and ask me. I know there's a nice lunch to have as well and plenty of drinks. If you would like to receive some networking tips from me, an ongoing, a monthly article about personal impact and things to think about, I'll leave some sheets over there on the bar. If you can just write your email address, please write it really clearly, otherwise I get back to my office and I can't make out what you've written. But happy networking. I promise I'm not going to be walking around assessing who's doing what, but I hope that was useful to you. Thank you very much.